Today, we'll be setting up this brand new aquarium. Wait, this is a paludarium. Today, we'll be setting up this brand new paludarium by UNS. So stay tuned. This is the new Ultum Nature Systems 60E Paludarium. It features the same footprint as the 60U aquarium. The new paludariums will come in two different sizes, the 45E and the 60E, and features similar footprints to two of our most popular tanks, the 45U and the 60U. It features the same 45-degree mitered edge, beveled edges, and ultra high clarity glass. You may have noticed that it features two openings, and these openings are meant for your filter accessories and any type of plumbing you want to put into your tank. There's a few options that you can do to either close or open or use these openings. The first one being closed. The optional plugs that we include can actually cover both holes so that it allows for you to build your substrate higher. The second option being the open option, where both holes can be opened so that you can use additional accessories such as our UNS mist maker set. The third option would be the flow option, which utilizes the optional UNS bulkheads that allows for you to plumb external filters and pumps. I'm going to show you a fourth option, which utilizes the Ultum Nature Systems Delta filter parts. These parts come with the Delta 60 and the Delta 90. So I've looped them through the holes, and one will be my inflow and the other one will be my outflow. So I've already decided how this aquascape will look. That way I can determine where the inflow and outflow will be. And don't worry, all these accessories will be hidden by the hardscape. I'm just putting all of this in so that I can build the hardscape around it. And once again, these accessories are included with all Delta filters, specific to their models. The hardscape I've chosen to use is all rock. Once again, I promise you I'll do a woodscape next, but for this purpose, I'm going to be using a UNS tank mat from a 45U and placing it in this 60E. That way, my aquascape will be a lot more stable. And because I'm using more rock, you'll see what I mean soon. Okay, so we'll be placing the big stone first. This is the base for the big stone, so. And a supporting stone here, just to hold it all up. And here's the big one. I'm gonna have to reposition this slightly. It's harder to scape on the side of the tank rather than in front of it, and even harder to scape behind the tank. So we'll just see how this goes. Hopefully I don't break anything. I always like to place the main stone first because it kind of determines what happens everywhere else around it, and also helps me determine how much space I have left within the tank. And in this case, I don't have too much space left because this stone is huge. So now I have the last big stone that I'm gonna sit in. And this is exactly why I wanted to use the tank mat in the tank to help stabilize all these rocks. Like, it won't move too much, but it helps to grip the rocks. And hopefully I remember how this scape should look like. Ooh, sorry for banging on the glass. Okay, so big stone in. And I'm going to do a little bit of tweaking. When I do a rock-only scape, I really look for stones that have similar textures and flow so that the whole scape will eventually look very cohesive, as if it was one mountainous scape. And right now I'm trying to determine that. I'm actually layering my stones so that it gives you more depth from foreground, midground, and background. And I have only a few stones left, which I'll be placing once again all around the main stone. The great thing about paludariums is you don't always have to follow the rules of aquascaping because it's not a planted tank. So here I am stacking this mound of rocks on the left side, or actually your right side. And typically I wouldn't do that in a planted aquarium, but for this paludarium, it adds a little bit more texture to the hardscape. So the hardscape's in. What do you think? Leave a comment below and let me know. Now that it's all set in place, I can still tweak it a little bit, but I'm gonna add the sand in first to kind of give you guys an idea of how the overall paludarium will look. Here I'm just adding a natural fine sand to the front and a little bit on the side. Hopefully I don't spill everywhere. That would be a nightmare to clean up. And the sand will cover up the tank mat. And don't worry about the sand getting on the rocks because I'm just going to brush it off with a paintbrush and flatten it all out. I'm trying to get all the grooves and gaps And you don't need that thick of a sand layer, just thick enough to cover the tank mat that I'm using. So now I'm brushing away all the excess sand that fell onto the rock, just for a cleaner look. You can actually leave the sand on the rock if you want that sandy texture. And I'm also brushing the sand onto the tank mat underneath these rocks to hide it. Getting a thin brush like this really helps in these tight little areas. Okay. Now it's time to add soil to the back. I'm only gonna plant the back right-hand side in this corner. So that's where I'm adding a lot more soil. And I'm not gonna go past the back opening of the paludarium. I'm just gonna go barely there. Back here, I'm just gonna plant the rooted plants. And I'm, of course, using contra soil, black extra fine. Hopefully I don't make a mess. I'm also checking the front to make sure the soil isn't spilling over and into the sand. In most cases, I rely on the hardscape to block the substrate and the sand so that there's a clear division. In other cases, you can use filter floss or filter foam to plug in the gaps so that the soil doesn't spill over. I think in our case, we're pretty successful. So you might have noticed that I'm pouring soil in with a cup rather than just pouring the whole bag of soil in. This helps me pour soil into more specific places that I would like to have soil. So the soil's all poured in. I like the level. And now I'm just cleaning up the rocks and the spillover. This gives it a way cleaner look if you do this, so it doesn't look like there's soil all over the place, especially when you have a sand foreground. So as you can see, I didn't cover up the back hole for the outflow. I actually took out the outflow because once I started putting in the soil and the hardscape in, I realized that my first configuration wouldn't work, so I'm going to try a different configuration. So I did, unfortunately, get some spillover in this area only, but I'm just going to top it off with a little bit of sand. And cover up that spillage right there. And boom, the soil is gone. The foreground is sandy once again. So now that we have the hardscape, the sand, and the contra soil in, all we need to do is plant and then plumb, and we're good to go. So as usual, we're gonna plant the foreground first. I wanted to use some plants that I don't really plant often. So the first plant I'm gonna plant is Hydrocordo Sotopioides. I hope I'm pronouncing these names correctly. But all the plants will be in the description below, so be sure to check it out. I chose these plants specifically because they remind me of little lily pads and clovers. So the whole hardscape and layout will have that ethereal look. And the plant that I'm planting right now is tissue culture form. So they're smaller right now, but eventually they'll get a little bigger and bushier. And once again, I'm planting pretty full, just to give that first initial impression and impact. So this is considered an aquatic plant, but I would say a good majority of aquatic plants are also grown emergent, which means it can grow out of water. So after the hydrocordo, I'm gonna plant a terrestrial plant because now we're going above water. This is a really awesome begonia species. And what's a paludarium without some terrestrial plants, right? So I'm gonna go a little higher in the foreground or the mid-ground. I'm gonna just plant it directly into the soil. This plant doesn't like to be super overwatered. And I'm being very careful when I'm planting this plant, just so I don't damage the roots and the stem. And I'm removing any leaves that look bad. This plant was actually taken from another paludarium setup that we have. And I'm adding it so that we can have some red accents, because most of the plants we're using in this paludarium are going to be green. So the reds will pop. I just can't get past how nice this plant looks. Just look at all the details and textures that this plant adds, let alone the color it's going to add. It's just fuzzy to touch. Okay, so now that I have the foreground and the midground planted, before we move on, I'm going to show you guys a cool little trick. I'll be using this spray bar, and not just having it spray water outwards. I'm going to be using airline tubing, cutting it to certain different lengths, and looping it through the rock crevices so that the tops of the rocks actually get watered. And that's a pretty cool effect, and you can even grow plants on top of the rock where there's no soil. So first, I'll just cut some lengths of tubing. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 spray bar holes to fill with tubing or to plug in. And this is all part of the plumbing that I was talking about earlier. You can use any type of tubing, but silicone tubing like this type of airline tubing is very flexible. so I can loop it through different parts of the paludarium very easily. Let me just cut some different lengths right now. And then I'll show you guys how to hide it and attach it. And I'm trying to cut super straight so they can go onto the spray bar easily. And I think this is the last one I need. So they're all different lengths right now. So I'm going to attach the first tubing. You'll notice that I kind of changed the layout of the outflow once again. That's because once I started planting, I realized that I needed more space in the back for the background plant. But attaching the silicone tubing is as easy as that. You just plug it in and you're good to go. I'm gonna go with this one. And don't worry, all of this tubing and piping will be hidden once I plant the background plant and the mosses. Right now I'm using the rock crevices to my advantage and the silicone tubing to my advantage. It's flexible, so the gaps of the rocks actually can hold your tubing. This is where the water will come out from the outflow. So I'll have water leaking down here. And wherever I'm looping this tubing through. This is just one of the many ways that you can customize your paludarium setup. Somehow I decided to go way more difficult than it should. But what's the fun in that if you don't challenge yourself, right? Now I'm going to plant this another hydrocaudo. This is Leucocephala. Once again, I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. So correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. I would appreciate it. I have a ton of smaller plantlets of this plant and larger plants. I'll plant the smaller ones in this area, and I'll plant the bigger, taller versions in this area. This will complete that lily pad look that I'm going for. This is an extremely underrated and really beautiful looking plant in an aquarium, so it should look good here. Its immersed form is very, very nice in my opinion. And also it gives enough height to hide all the veins that I just put on. I'm planting these one at a time just so I don't harm the plant, and it's just easier to plant that way. Because if you take a look, some of these are actually very, very long. So now the last plant, I have a handful of mini Christmas moss. It's a very soft moss. The texture of it is super fine and very detailed, which is why I like it. I'm just gonna lay it in different areas of the stone where the water flow will go based on where I put all the tubing. And here's a spot right here, and I want this moss to grow out of water, so above the water. And I'm just placing it on, and once the water starts flowing, it kind of acts like a glue, so I'm not even gonna glue the moss to the rocks. I'm just gonna simply just place it in the crevices and where I know the water will flow. Also, the moss will help kind of slow down the flow from these airline tubings. And that way, the water will just soak the moss and will not push the moss off the rocks. And I'll kind of use this moss to guide where the water goes to, because moss is almost like cotton. It will soak up water. And once it soaks up water, that area where the moss is will stay wet. And I'm just putting a really fine, thin layer, and I'll let the rest of it grow out on its own. So it might not look like much right now, but once it starts growing, it should be fine. I can't see backwards, so I might have to move to the front. Just to check and make sure I got all the right areas. And I don't want to overwhelm the rock with moss, simply because I want to show off the texture of the rocks I chose. I mean, it looks cool, so why not show it off, right? And I'm gonna do the same thing up top over here and cover up this tubing. And I'm gently just placing it down. This moss is slightly moist and wet. So there you have it, a finished UNS 60E Paludarium. Now, the next step and the final step is I'm gonna put the plumbing through to the canister filter and turn it on, see if the water flows where I actually planted the moss. And once it does, if there's any extra spillover water areas, I'm gonna put some moss on top and we're good to go. And there you have it, a finished UNS 60E Paludarium. Be sure to like and subscribe, leave a comment below, let me know what you think, and stay tuned for the next one. And as promised, I'll make sure I'll do a woodscape next. See you next time.